Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something that's pretty much unavoidable these days: microplastics and the human body.
It's a topic that's been getting more and more attention, and for good reason.
Yeah, we're finding microplastics everywhere, right?
Pretty much. Lungs, blood.
Placentas.
Yeah, it's concerning.
So today we really want to kind of unpack this.
Definitely.
What do we know about how these microplastics are affecting us? How worried should we be? And is there anything we can do about it?
Good questions. And I think one of the things that's most alarming is just the sheer scale of it.
Yeah, like how much plastic are we talking about here?
Well, scientists estimate that there are about 14 billion tons of microplastics in our oceans alone,
Wow.
which is 92% of all the plastic found on the surface.
That's a staggering number, 14 billion tons.
It is. To try to put that into perspective, imagine filling the entire Grand Canyon with plastic.
Okay, yeah, that's an image that's going to stay with me for a while. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, can we back up a bit and just define what exactly are microplastics?
Sure. So microplastics are any type of plastic fragment that's less than 5 millimeters in length.
5 millimeters.
Yeah.
So how big is that?
About the size of a sesame seed.
Okay, so tiny, tiny pieces of plastic.
Exactly. And there are two main types. We have primary microplastics and secondary microplastics.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, primary microplastics are things that are manufactured to be small. So things like microbeads that you find in exfoliating scrubs.
Oh, right, okay.
And then secondary microplastics are the result of larger pieces of plastic breaking down over time.
Okay, so like if I have a plastic water bottle and it ends up in the ocean, it's going to break down into these little pieces.
Exactly.
So both kinds of microplastics are ending up all over the place. But how exactly are they getting inside us?
Well, it's estimated that we consume about 5 grams of microplastics every single week.
Every week.
Uh-huh.
That's a lot.
It is. And that's roughly the weight of a credit card.
Wow. I'm not intentionally eating plastic every week, so how is that happening?
Right. You're probably not intentionally eating plastic, but think about all the different ways that we might be ingesting these particles without even realizing it.
Okay, give me some examples.
Well, seafood is a major source. These particles accumulate in marine life.
Right. Makes sense?
And then you also have microplastics in drinking water, both bottled and tap.
Uh-huh.
And even in the air we breathe.
Really?
Yeah, they can be released from synthetic clothing during laundry,
Oh, interesting.
from tire wear and tear, even from dust particles.
Okay, so we've established that microplastics are pretty much unavoidable at this point.
Yeah.
And we're consuming a credit card's worth of them every week.
Right.
But the big question is, what does this mean for our health?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? And unfortunately, it's one that we're still trying to fully understand. The research is ongoing, but there are already some red flags.
Like what?
Well, for example, there was a recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine. They found a concerning link between microplastics in blood vessels and a higher risk of heart attack or stroke.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. Patients in the study who had these tiny plastic particles in their arteries were twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke compared to those without them.
Twice as likely.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. So it's not just heart health we should be worried about.
No, unfortunately, there's growing evidence that microplastics may contribute to a whole range of health problems.
Like what?
Well, we know that when these particles enter the body, they can trigger immune responses and inflammation.
Makes sense.
There's also a concern about them acting like Trojan horses.
What?
Carrying harmful chemicals deeper into our tissues.
Okay.
Things like BPA, phthalates, PFAS.
Right, those are known to be endocrine disruptors.
Exactly.
And they've been linked to all sorts of health issues.
Right, reproductive problems, developmental delays, even certain types of cancers.
So we're potentially looking at heart problems, hormone disruption, cancer. This is starting to sound pretty serious. Is there anything we can do about it? Like, is there any way to get this plastic out of our bodies?
Well, there's no magic pill, unfortunately, to instantly remove microplastics, but there are things we can do to support our body's natural detoxification processes.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, it starts with what you eat. A diet that's rich in fiber can help your body eliminate waste more efficiently.
So loading up on fruits, vegetables, whole grains.
Exactly. Think of it like giving your system the tools that it needs to flush out those unwanted toxins.
Okay, so we're giving our bodies tiny brooms to sweep out the plastic.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And while there's no guaranteed way to completely eliminate microplastics, focusing on supporting your body's natural detoxification pathways is definitely a proactive step you can take.
This is all incredibly helpful. I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about specific steps that they can take to minimize exposure. So let's dive into those right after this. Okay, we're back and ready to talk solutions. We've talked about the risks of microplastics and how they're getting into our bodies, but now let's focus on what we can do to fight back. What are some things our listeners can do to reduce their exposure?
So knowledge is power, right? Once you understand the issue, you can start making more informed choices. And a lot of it starts with simple everyday things, like in the kitchen.
Okay, what can we do in the kitchen?
Well, one thing is to choose fresh or frozen foods over processed options.
Okay, so less of those prepackaged meals and snacks. Makes sense. What else?
Think about food storage, too. You know, those plastic containers are convenient, but switching to glass or stainless steel can really help reduce plastic leaching, especially when you're heating food.
I've actually been meaning to replace my plastic containers for a while. This is the push I needed.
There you go.
So what about cooking methods? Does how we prepare our food play a role?
Yeah, definitely. Heating plastic can accelerate that breakdown process,
Yeah.
releasing those harmful chemicals.
Right.
So try to avoid microwaving food in plastic containers.
Okay.
Opt for glass or ceramic instead.
Great tip. I'm already feeling more empowered to make changes.
Good.
What about water? We talked about it briefly before, but are there certain types of water that are safer?
Yeah, it's a big one. While most municipal water systems do a pretty good job filtering out the larger contaminants, microplastics can still slip through.
Right.
So investing in a good quality water filter can make a big difference,
Okay.
especially one that specifically mentions microplastic removal.
Got it. Adding that to my to-do list,
Good.
filtering my water, ditching the plastic containers. Those are two big wins already.
Hmm.
What about other areas of our lives? What about those synthetic clothes we mentioned?
Right, clothing is another big one. Those tiny microfibers that shed from synthetic materials like polyester nylon, they end up in our waterways
Right.
and eventually back in us. So choosing natural fabrics like cotton wool linen whenever possible, that's a really good step.
I love that. More sustainable wardrobe.
Exactly.
Are there tips for dealing with the synthetic clothes we already have?
Sure. Washing them in cold water using a gentle cycle can help reduce friction. And you can also get something called a microfiber laundry filter.
What's that?
It attaches to your washing machine, and it basically catches those tiny particles before they enter the water system.
Oh, wow. Those laundry filters sound like a game changer. It's amazing how many simple solutions are out there. What about other ways to reduce our plastic footprint and exposure? Any other tips?
Well, here's one you might not have thought about. Tea bags.
Tea bags.
A lot of tea bags contain plastic to help them keep their shape.
Oh, right.
And those microplastics can end up in your tea. So opt for loose leaf tea or tea bags made from natural materials.
I never would have thought about tea bags. Great advice. What about personal care products?
Another big one, things like toothpaste, body wash, exfoliating scrubs,
Yes.
they often contain microplastics.
Really?
Yeah, check the ingredient list, look for terms like polyethylene, polypropylene.
Okay.
But thankfully, more and more brands are offering microplastic-free alternatives.
Oh, it.
So making that switch is a pretty simple way to reduce your exposure.
This has been so insightful. It feels like every step we take to minimize microplastics, we're also making healthier choices in general.
Exactly, for ourselves and for the planet.
But what about those microplastics that are already in our bodies? Is there anything we can do to help our bodies remove them?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
And while there's no quick fix, we can support our natural detoxification systems.
Okay.
We've talked about fiber, but staying well hydrated is key too. Drinking plenty of water helps flush out waste, keeps things moving.
So all that water we're filtering is actually helping our bodies get rid of those unwanted microplastics. It all connects.
It does.
What about other ways to support detoxification?
Certain foods are really good for that. Cruciferous vegetables.
Like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale.
Exactly. They're packed with compounds that support liver function, which plays a huge role in filtering toxins.
Okay, so load up on those green veggies.
Yeah. And don't underestimate the power of sweating. Regular exercise, whether it's a brisk walk, a run, yoga, helps eliminate toxins.
So we're not just sitting here worrying about microplastics. We're actively taking steps to minimize our exposure and support our bodies.
That's the goal. It's all about empowering yourself and taking action. You don't have to do everything overnight.
Right.
Start small, focus on the areas where you feel you can make the biggest impact.
Love that. Progress, not perfection. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling more aware and more optimistic.
That's great to hear. Remember, we're all in this together, and every step we take matters.
I think that's a great note to transition into our final segment.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive on microplastics. We've talked about the different types, how they're getting into our systems, the potential health risks. But most importantly, we've talked about practical steps to reduce our exposure.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways here is that we're not powerless. We actually have a lot more control than we might realize.
Absolutely. It's empowering to know that we can make choices to protect ourselves and our health.
Mhm.
I did want to circle back, though, to something we talked about earlier. You mentioned that study linking microplastics in the blood to a higher risk of heart attacks and strokes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So that was a study out of the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was pretty groundbreaking because it was one of the first to actually show a direct correlation between microplastics in the bloodstream and cardiovascular health. What they found was that patients with heart disease who had detectable levels of microplastics in their blood vessels were twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke compared to those who didn't have those microplastics present.
Wow, that's a pretty scary statistic. Are there any other health concerns related to microplastics that you think are really important for our listeners to be aware of?
Well, besides the cardiovascular risks, there's also growing concern about the impact of microplastics on hormonal health.
Why?
We know that some of the chemicals that are often found in plastics, things like BPA and phthalates, can act as endocrine disruptors, meaning that they can interfere with the body's hormonal balance. And there's some emerging research suggesting that microplastics may actually be able to transport these chemicals even deeper into our tissues.
That's definitely concerning.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential consequences of that kind of endocrine disruption?
Well, endocrine disruptors have been linked to a pretty wide range of health issues, things like reproductive problems, developmental delays in children, thyroid dysfunction, and even some types of cancers. It's definitely an area where more research is needed, but it's something that we should all be paying attention to for sure.
Absolutely. It's just another reminder that our health is really intricately connected to the health of the environment. What we put into our bodies and what we release into the world, it all comes back to us in some way.
Couldn't agree more. And that's why taking action is so important. Every step we take to reduce plastic consumption, support our body's natural detox processes, and advocate for a cleaner, healthier planet, it all makes a difference.
So well said. And for those listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed or not sure where to start, we've put together a list of resources on our website. You can find tips for reducing your plastic use, finding microplastic-free products, and supporting organizations that are working to address plastic pollution.
Yeah. Knowledge is power. So we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep sharing what you learn with others.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. A
Mm-hmm.
little challenging, but ultimately, I think there's a lot of hope here.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned that while the problem is vast and complex, we're not powerless. By making informed choices and taking action, we can protect our health, our planet, and future generations.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everybody. Until next time, keep diving deep.